I'm Elizabeth at A Literary Princess. If you are new here, welcome. I'm a 6-year PhD candidate in English literature with a focus on Victorian women novelists. And as you might expect, I love to read. Today I have my July wrap-up for you. I read 8 books this July, and almost all of them were for Jane Austen July, an event hosted by Katie from Books and Things, Marissa from Blatantly Bookish, and Claudia from Spinster's Library. And it is all about reading Jane Austen and Jane Austen adjacent works in the month of July. So we are going to go in the order that I read them, and I will talk about the challenges that each book were for as we get to them. I completed 6 of the 7 challenges, and in addition to the 8 books, I also do have 2 films to talk about with you. So let's jump in. So the first book that I read counted for the second challenge, which was to read something by Jane Austen that was not one of her main novels. And this is volume the second, which is a volume of her juvenilia containing Love and Friendship, Leslie Castle, A History of England by, I forget the whole title, but it's funny. A History of England by a ignorant and, here we are. A History of England from the reign of Henry IV to the death of Charles I by a partial, prejudiced, and ignorant historian. And then also just some collections of letters that she wrote that were starts of stories and some scraps. So I had originally just planned to read Love and Friendship, but I decided, what the heck, let's read the whole thing. And I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars. I think that my favorite was Leslie Castle. And I'm like, I want the ending of it. It's not really completed. At least I didn't feel it was completed. And I'm like, oh, I want to know more. I was really enjoying it. It's a epistolary story, and it was just funny. Love and Friendship was also very funny, also an epistolary story. About some of the most ridiculous girls that I have ever seen in literature. You can really see where Austen was developing her social satire and some of the themes she would write about in her early books, particularly the cult of sensibility, which she tackles in Sense and Sensibility, is also a very big part of Love and Friendship. So I had a grand time with this. I gave it 4 stars. I'm really glad that I finally got around to reading it. And I would love to have the other 2 volumes of her juvenilia, because there is a volume the first and a volume the third. But we'll see. Next up was a library book that I have sadly already had to return, but it counted for challenge number 4, which was to read a retelling of one of Jane Austen's works or a historical fiction set in her time. And for this one, I went with the second option, a historical fiction set in Jane Austen's time. This is Godmersham Park by Jill Hornby. The book is set in the early 1800s, and it features the Austen family as characters. We are following Anne Sharp, who was a very real person, and the governess to Fanny Austen Knight, who was Jane's niece, the daughter of Edward Austen Knight, who was one of her brothers that was adopted by rich relatives and left a very grand inheritance and a very grand house, Godmersham Park. So we are following Anne as she becomes a governess at Godmersham Park and begins developing relationships with various members of the Austen family, including Jane herself, her sister Cassandra, and her brother Henry. This was really good. I enjoyed it a lot. It's a very quiet kind of book. There is not a whole lot of plot. It's very character focused, but it was such a joy. Anne Sharp is also a writer. She ends up writing a little play for the children to put on because the Austens were big fans of theatricals. Seeing her relationship with Jane develop was lovely. They had a lifelong friendship. And getting to see Jane in some, not the earliest stage of writing Sense and Sensibility, but in the process of writing it was really fun. It was just great. It felt very real. The characters just felt like, I'm like, yeah, this is exactly what Jane Austen probably was like. And it was really fun because later in the month I read a biography of Jane Austen, so I was able to compare what was portrayed in the novel versus what is being portrayed in the biography. And I must say, I felt that Jill Hornby stuck pretty close to the personalities, as far as we know, of the Austen family. So yeah, really great time. I am very excited to read her other book, Miss Austen, which focuses on Cassandra Austen. Next up is the book for the first challenge of the event, which is to read one of Jane Austen's main 6 novels. And for this, I reread Pride and Prejudice. This was my first time rereading it since I was 17 years old. I have a whole video about my feelings upon rereading this as an adult, but long story short, I loved it just as much as I always have. It was hysterical. It was just lovely. I mean, Jane Austen is one of my favorite authors for a reason, and this is my second favorite Austen book. The first is Persuasion, but this was just such a joy to go back to. It made me happy. It almost felt like coming home. I feel that way with Austen books a lot, that I'm like, oh, now I'm home. Okay. I don't know. Maybe that's weird. I have no idea. But yes, this was 5 stars, of course. Of course. And I'm so glad that I finally reread it. I can't believe it had been as long as it had. Next up, I took a little break from the Jane Austen July books to read another library book that I've had to return. This is Needful Things by Stephen King. It is subtitled The Last Story of Castle Rock, although I think that's false. I'm pretty sure he went back to Castle Rock in some later books, but okay. Okay, Mr. King, that's fine. Needful Things was fantastic. This 600 and something page book was so good because it does what Stephen King does best, and that is highlighting the just absolute horror that is humanity. There is a supernatural aspect. The supernatural aspect is running the show here, but it's really not the scary thing. The scary thing is what people will do to each other with the slightest provocation. So basically, the concept is that a new store has opened in downtown Castle Rock. It is called Needful Things, run by a man named, begin with an L, Leland Gaunt. And he's got a lot of interesting things in his shop, and he sells them for prices that are kind of surprisingly low, except he also asks for little favors as payment as well. This is an ensemble cast. I suppose if you had to say there were main characters, it would be Sheriff Alan Pangborn and his girlfriend Polly Clamers? Chamlers? I don't really know how to pronounce her last name. But we see so many different characters in Castle Rock. And again, this is what Stephen King does best, is showing the effect of something on a whole town and bringing you through the entire town and having you get to know all these different characters. And even though you're not spending super amounts, like a huge amount of time with them, you really do get to know them. This was utterly fantastic. I gave this 5 stars. It was the perfect book to read in July. I very much associate Stephen King with summer. I know you would think that it would be more October, because like Halloween. And this book is actually set in the early fall, I think. But something about Stephen King's books, to me, with the exception of The Shining, but all the others feel like very summer books to me, like they should be read in the heat of the summer. So I had a lovely time with this. It was recommended to me by one of my friends who knows that I love Stephen King. She had just read it and she said it was really good. And she was absolutely correct. Then we were back to the Jane Austen July reading, and this counted for challenge number 5, which was to read a book by a contemporary of Jane Austen. And for this, I finally read The Wild Irish Girl by Sydney Owenson, Lady Morgan. This was published in 1806, and it focuses on a man named Horatio who is exiled to his father's estate in Ireland, and he ends up falling in with some of the native Irish, I guess you would call them gentry, including the Prince of Innismore and his daughter Glorvina. This is an epistolary novel, and it was written very much as Owenson was trying to combat some of the prejudices against the Irish people. So Horatio comes into this situation thinking like the Irish are barbaric, their customs are all like barbaric and strange and not civilized, but he starts to learn about the culture and ends up befriending these people, falling in love with Glorvina, and really coming to an understanding of the culture and how beautiful it is. So one problem I did have with this is that it is very heavy on explaining Irish customs and history, which was fine, but it felt like at many times it was at the expense of the plot. There's also this weird thing at the end for like the last for like the major denouement of the story. We've been having everything told in letters from Horatio to his friend, and then all of a sudden we go to a third person narrative. And that was just a really strange choice. I was like, huh. So I did like aspects of it, and I'm really glad that I read it, but it was only a 3-star read for me. And now I can give it back to the friend I borrowed it from over a year ago. Next up was for challenge number 3 to read a work of nonfiction about Jane Austen or her time. And for this, I finally read Jane Austen, A Life by Claire Tomalin. This is a biography of Austen, obviously. I thought that it was great. I gave it 4 stars. It's not as... like, there's some biographies that I end up giving 5 stars that are like really, like, it's almost like reading fiction. You're so pulled in and you really feel like you know them. I did not have quite that experience with this one, although I did really enjoy it, and I think Tomalin did a wonderful job showing who the Austens were. I felt like sometimes she, like kind of made some assumptions that I didn't really agree with, or that I felt was too far to claim that something was that way when we have very little evidence of it. A lot of Austen's letters were destroyed by her sister after her death. So sometimes you have to, it's guesswork. And sometimes I think she pushed it a little too far. I also did not always agree with her readings of the novels. I very much disagreed with, which one was it now? It might have been Mansfield Park, actually. I know there were some things that I disagreed with in her reading of Pride and Prejudice as well. And she spent such little time on Northanger Abbey, which I felt was unfair. But overall, I did think this was really good, just overall biography of Jane Austen, and also of her whole family, because we get a lot of information about what other members of her family were doing and their lives. And I think now that I've read this, I'm gonna feel more comfortable going into biographies and critical works that look at a more specific thing within Jane Austen's life. So next year I want to read Jane Austen at Home by Lucy Worsley. I have Jane Austen Early and Late by someone whose name I don't remember, but it's focusing on her juvenilia and how it influenced her later works and whatnot. So now that I have like this overview, I feel like I can go into other things. So yeah, 4 stars, highly recommend, just not my favorite biography. Next up is another library book, but I do have a copy of this one because I got it right at the end of the month. And this is actually another one for challenge number 4. And instead of just a historical fiction set in the time, I chose to read a retelling of one of Austen's novels. I don't do this very often. I find that I tend to not really like retellings of classic novels. Fairy tales, great. Classic novels, I'm always a bit like meh about. This is Unequal Affections by Laura S. Ormiston. And sorry that I'm like holding it weird, but this has the address of the library that I go to, and I don't really feel the need for you to all know where I live. So this is taking the premise of what if Elizabeth Bennet had accepted Darcy's first proposal. And as I was reading Pride and Prejudice, I really started to wonder. I was like, what would have happened? I enjoyed this. It was fun, very readable, and like a good time. It was not quite what I expected. This, it starts with the proposal, obviously, and her accepting it. I thought it was going to then quickly move into their married life, but it actually fully takes place in the month before their marriage. And them kind of falling in love and getting to know each other as that month progresses. So I feel like I kind of didn't get some of the things that I wanted. Because what I really was thinking was, when I was reading Pride and Prejudice, was the scene where she's looking around Pemberley and thinking, wow, I could have been mistress of all this. And I was hoping that Unequal Affections would kind of cover that, but it does not. I also did not like the characterization of Darcy very much. He is really possessive and controlling, and I just don't think that matches Austen's depiction of him at all. I think that is something that is more from late 20th century, like the late 20th century romance genre, that has seeped its way into here, and I didn't like that at all. But it was overall really fun, quite funny, and I had a good time. I give it 3.5 stars. And the final book is kind of more Jane Austen July adjacent, I suppose, because it is historical fiction, but it is set after Jane Austen's time. It takes place in the 1840s, and Austen died in the late 18-teens, maybe? You'd think I'd know this. I just read the biography, but no, all the information is whoosh. However, this was written by one of the hosts of Jane Austen July, and it was heavily influenced by Jane Austen, particularly Pride and Prejudice and Emma, as the author has spoken about in a recent video of hers. Yes, this is The Trouble with Mrs Montgomery Hurst by our very own Katie Lumsden from Books and Things. I have had this pre-ordered since December, and I was so excited when I got it. I was in the middle of like 3 other books. I was like, you have to finish your other books. And I was like, but I want to read this. And then the other part of my brain was like, finish what you're reading. So I compromised and I finished 2 of the books. And then I started this. Okay, I loved The Secrets of Heartwood Hall, which was Katie's debut novel. It was 5 stars from me. It was on my top 10 books of the year list at like number 7 or 6, I think. This was amazing. Katie, you've outdone yourself. I love this so much. This is about a small fictional county of Wickenshire, much like Anthony Trollope's Barsetshire. And we are following kind of the whole town. It's another ensemble cast as one of the most eligible bachelors in the neighborhood suddenly gets married to somebody who nobody has ever heard of. And gossip is naturally just flying through the county. We have so many fascinating characters in here. We have Amelia Ashpoint, who is the daughter of a wealthy brewer, and she has 2 secrets, and her father really wanted her to marry Mr. Montgomery Hurst, but she was like, that's never going to happen because of one of her secrets. We have Felicia Elton, who is the most perfect of all perfect Victorian ladies, and yet nobody's asked her to marry them yet. We also have Diggory Ashpoint, Amelia's brother, who is in love with Lady Rose, the daughter of Lord and Lady Wickford. And he is also best friends with her brother, who isn't very keen on the match and is also kind of a dick. And then, of course, we have the Hursts, who I loved. I loved all of them except for Lord Salbridge. You're not supposed to love him. He's a dick. He's awful. He's like, if this book has a villain, it's him, I guess. I loved this so much. Oh man, I was so invested in all of these characters. I cannot even express how much I loved this. You can see the influence of Austen, you can see the influence of Trollope, of Gaskell. I think I caught a few things from Margaret Oliphant. It's just so good. It's so good. Seriously, pick up this book. It is amazing. Also, look at this cover. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Oh. I'll show off the book more when I do my book haul for the last few months, but it's just gorgeous, and the inside is just as gorgeous as the outside. And Katie, thank you for sharing your work with the world, because this was such an absolute joy. So obviously I gave this 5 stars, and the question now is where it is going to end up in my top books of the year list. And I am not entirely sure yet which spot it's going to be in, but it will be in the top 3. Yes. One of my top 3 books is going to get unseated because this was just phenomenal. Phenomenal. Oh, I loved it. I can't wait to reread it. Like, I just finished it a few days ago and I'm like, I want to reread it. I'm also going to share it with my mom, who loved Heartwood Hall, and she'll love this as well. So yeah, 5 stars. Thank you, Katie. So that is all of the books that I read in July, but I also want to talk about 2 movies that I watched. There are 2 watching challenges for Jane Austen July. One is to watch a direct adaptation of one of the novels, and I did that, but I watched 2 direct adaptations of 2 different novels. I did not end up getting to the other watch challenge of watching a modern retelling. I was considering watching some of the Lizzie Bennet diaries. It just didn't happen. So let's talk about the movies. So the first one is what I said I wanted to watch in my TBR, and this is the 2007 Northanger Abbey, which I was not sure if I had seen it before or seen some of it. I had not seen any of this before. So I convinced my husband to watch this with me, thinking that he probably wouldn't like it that much. And I had a really good time, and he had a great time. Like, I was shocked because he's watched Pride and Prejudice with me and he was like, it's like too romantic for him. I think this worked for him because it really is a satire and it's focused on the comedy. At least the novel is, and so is this film. The way that they do Catherine, like, thinking about these gothic scenes from novels and then imagining them onto real life people and places, I thought was done really well. And it was just such a good time. I had so much fun. And then I got him to watch another Jane Austen adaptation, and he also liked this. This was a rewatch for me. This was 2020 Emma. And I thought it would be good because it is definitely one of the adaptations that plays up the comedy. And I was right, my husband did really enjoy this. And I had a great time rewatching it. It is not my favorite adaptation of Emma. My favorite is the 2009 BBC miniseries, mainly because the film, being a film, has to condense things, and I feel like it doesn't really give enough of Jane Fairfax's story because the focus is so much on Emma herself. Whereas in the book, we get a lot more with Jane Fairfax, even though the focus is still on Emma. She is the title character, but we do see Jane's story, and that is something that I wish we had in this movie. But the costumes are delightful, as are the sets. The acting is great, and I just had a great time with it. So that is my July wrap-up. Let me know down in the comments below. What did you read this July? Have you read any of these? What did you think? Were you participating in Jane Austen July? What did you read and watch for it? If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to see more of my bookish content. It has been great chatting with you. I will see you soon. Bye.